Evelyn Markham had spent the entire afternoon rehearsing the moment in her head, imagining the look on Daniel's face when he finally realized what she had been trying to give him for 10 long years. The news had arrived that morning, quiet, clinical, almost unreal. 4 weeks pregnant. A string of words she had thought she might never hear again after a decade of treatments, injections, consultations, and the slow erosion of hope that comes with each failed attempt. She had held the result in her hands for several minutes, staring at the faint printed lines as if they might vanish if she blinked too hard. But they didn't. They stayed exactly where they were. Solid. True. Life-changing. She wanted the reveal to be special, something memorable, something worthy of the years of heartbreak that preceded it. And because Daniel had been so preoccupied with his company's upcoming celebration at the Palmer House Hilton, talking about it for weeks, obsessing over every detail, it felt like the perfect setting. Fancy, dramatic, grand. A place where an unforgettable surprise would feel natural rather than staged. Evelyn stood in front of the mirror in their bedroom, adjusting the simple black catering uniform she had rented specifically for the night. It wasn't glamorous, far from it, but anonymity was the point. If Daniel saw her too soon, everything would fall apart. She tucked her hair into a low bun, applied light makeup, and slipped the envelope into the inside pocket of her blazer. She touched it once, as if reassuring herself it was still there, still real. She whispered softly to her reflection, "Tonight, you'll finally know." When she arrived at the Palmer House Hilton, the lobby shimmered with golden light reflecting off the historic ceiling murals. Guests filtered in wearing evening gowns, tailored suits, and the kind of confidence that came from years of building careers in Chicago's competitive corporate scene. Evelyn kept her head slightly down, following the path toward the service entrance, where catering staff were entering and exiting with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. No one questioned her presence. No one even looked twice. That was exactly what she needed. Inside the grand ballroom, the celebration was already in motion. Jazz music drifted through the air, floating above the soft chatter of guests networking, laughing and toasting to another milestone for Markham & Cober's advertising. The lighting was warm, flattering, making every corner of the room feel alive. Evelyn paused near the wall, letting her eyes search the crowd for Daniel's familiar frame. She spotted him near the center of the room, impeccably dressed as always. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly fitted, a subtle statement of authority without shouting for attention, but something about him felt off. Daniel wasn't mingling with the same easy charm he usually displayed at events like this. He wasn't laughing, wasn't exchanging long conversations with clients or colleagues. Instead, he stood with a drink in hand, gaze fixed repeatedly on the ballroom's entrance. Evelyn's chest tightened. He looked tense, as if waiting for someone important, someone who wasn't her. His fingers drummed lightly against the glass, a habit he never displayed unless anxious. And every time a new guest stepped through the door, he straightened slightly, only to settle back with a faint expression of disappointment. She tried to brush off the unease. Daniel had been stressed lately. Work had been intense. His company was expanding, and he had been chasing a new partnership for months. Maybe he was expecting an investor, maybe a colleague. Maybe she was overthinking everything because she was nervous, emotional, hormonal. She wanted so badly for it to be nothing. Evelyn moved closer, weaving between servers as she lifted an empty tray to maintain the appearance of working. She needed to get close enough to place the envelope on Daniel's champagne tray, close enough for him to discover it naturally, without suspicion. Her heart beat with a mixture of excitement and doubt, but she pushed forward, determined to give him this moment. Daniel checked the entrance again. For the first time all evening, Evelyn's hope flickered. She held onto the envelope inside her jacket, feeling the weight of it press against her ribs. A promise, a miracle, something she had dreamed of for so long. She reminded herself that tonight was meant to be joyful, that this was supposed to be a memory they would cherish forever. But as she watched Daniel continue scanning the doorway, distracted and strangely restless, a small, uninvited fear began to bloom quietly beneath her excitement. Hope and unease settled side by side in her chest, and Evelyn, still disguised, stepped deeper into the ballroom, toward the man she thought she knew. Evelyn was adjusting the champagne flutes on her tray when the ballroom doors opened again, letting in a rush of cooler hallway air. Several guests glanced toward the entrance, but it was Daniel's reaction that instantly froze her in place. His posture shifted, tense at first, then almost electric, as his eyes locked onto the figure stepping inside. A young woman, no more than 24, crossed the threshold with the kind of unstudied confidence that only came from a lifetime of being seen, admired, and obeyed. Her dress shimmered under the chandelier lights, a silver satin slip that clung to her slender frame as if tailored specifically for her. Her hair was styled in effortless waves, the kind of look that required both expensive products and someone skilled enough to make it appear natural. She moved with the grace of someone raised in private schools, photographed at charity galas, and accustomed to entering rooms where everyone already knew her last name, Ava Kensington. Evelyn recognized her instantly from the articles Daniel had shown her months ago when he first mentioned the possibility of collaborating with the Kensington family. At the time, it had sounded like business. They're a major power in Chicago real estate, Eve. Landing them could change everything for the agency. But he had spoken about Harrison Kensington, the billionaire patriarch, not his daughter. He had never once mentioned meeting her. But here she was, and Daniel's entire demeanor changed as soon as she appeared. He set down his drink without looking, nearly knocking it over as he moved toward her with unrestrained eagerness. His smile, one Evelyn hadn't seen directed her way in months, spread across his face with an ease that made her stomach twist. He didn't hesitate, didn't keep a respectable, business-like distance. Instead, he reached out, placing a hand on the small of Ava's back as if it were the most natural gesture in the world. Ava beamed up at him, her eyes bright, her hand lingering on his forearm just a moment too long. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the stem of the champagne flute she had been adjusting. She willed herself not to stare, not to let her thoughts rush ahead of her. But the scene unfolding in front of her was too undeniable, too intimate, too rehearsed. These weren't two people meeting at a corporate event. These were two people who knew each other, deeply, comfortably, privately. She forced her body to move, lifting her tray and stepping into the circulation of servers weaving through the crowd. She approached their side of the ballroom slowly, blending in with the other staff. As she drew closer, the soft hum of conversation from nearby tables shifted into something that made her breath hitch. "Honestly," one woman whispered to her colleague, "they look perfect together." "Everyone at the office knows," the other replied. "It's been going on for months." Evelyn's heart slammed against her ribs. Her grip on the tray trembled so violently she had to pause for a second, trying to steady her breath. She replayed the words in her mind, hoping she had misheard them. But the whispers continued, careless and cruel in their casual certainty. She risked another look at Daniel and Ava. They were standing far too close. Daniel leaned down slightly, saying something that made Ava laugh, a soft, private sound she covered with her hand. He brushed a loose strand of her hair behind her shoulder, his fingers grazing her skin in a way no coworker would ever dare. Ava tilted her head toward him, speaking in a low voice that made his expression soften, warm, almost tender. A tenderness Evelyn had longed to see from him for years. Her throat tightened. The envelope inside her jacket felt suddenly heavy, like a secret she was carrying into a battlefield she hadn't realized she was stepping onto. She edged closer, close enough to overhear more fragments of conversation from Daniel's colleagues. They're inseparable lately. She's the reason he's been so distracted. Her parents adore him. They say he has real potential. And Evelyn? Someone whispered, a shrug. I think that marriage has been over for a while. Evelyn almost dropped her tray. Her pulse raced, her breathing shallow, her eyes fixed on the man she had loved for over a decade, the man she had trusted with her heart, her future, her last fragile hope of motherhood, the man who now stood before her, shining with a happiness he had not shown her in years, reserved now for someone else. She took a step back, then another, retreating into the flow of servers until she reached the edge of the ballroom again. Her disguise protected her. No one noticed the shift in her expression, the trembling at the corners of her mouth. The room spun gently around her, the music suddenly too loud, the lights too bright. Her heart was pounding so hard it felt impossible to keep breathing normally. The first crack in her marriage had opened, and she could feel it widening with every passing second. Evelyn tightened her grip on the champagne tray as she moved back toward Daniel and Ava's table. The weight of the glasses felt unfamiliar in her hands, as though her body no longer remembered how to do something so simple. But she kept walking, forcing her steps to remain steady. She needed to get close enough to hear, close enough to understand, close enough to learn whether the whispers around the room had been cruel exaggerations or the truth she had never allowed herself to imagine. Daniel and Ava had shifted to a more private corner of the ballroom, away from the main cluster of executives, almost as if seeking a pocket of space meant only for them. Evelyn approached with the practiced ease of a server, slipping through a crowd, her tray held slightly elevated. Their voices rose and dipped in soft waves, but as she neared the table, the words sharpened into devastating clarity. "I promise it won't be much longer," Daniel was saying, his tone low and reassuring. "The divorce papers are already being drafted. I'll be free soon." Free. The word hit Evelyn like a physical blow, something sharp and cold slicing cleanly through her ribcage. She stopped behind the table, just close enough to hear everything while remaining invisible in her uniform. Ava leaned in, her hand resting lightly on Daniel's wrist. "I trust you," she murmured. "But my parents are serious. They can't sign anything with you until it's official. You know how they are. They need the clean break." "I know," Daniel replied quickly. "I've told them I understand. They're right to protect their interests. And once everything is finalized, we can move forward with the partnership and everything else. Everything else. A future. A life. Together." Evelyn's breath caught painfully in her throat. She felt the room tilt slightly, as if the marble beneath her feet had shifted. She struggled to keep her face empty, her posture steady, but her fingers tightened so hard around the tray's rim she feared the glasses might shatter. A colleague approached their table, someone Evelyn vaguely recognized from previous holiday parties. He raised his glass with a wide grin. "To the most beautiful couple of the evening," he shouted over the music. The others chimed in instantly, laughter erupting around the table. "To Daniel and Ava. You two are perfect together. Finally making it public, huh?" Ava blushed, playing coy, though she clearly enjoyed the attention. Daniel didn't deny it. He didn't even hesitate. He slipped an arm around Ava's waist, pulling her closer as if the rest of the world had already accepted what he had kept hidden from Evelyn. Evelyn backed away, her steps slow and deliberate, retreating without drawing attention. She slipped between other servers and made her way toward the far exit, leading to a service corridor. The moment the door swung shut behind her, the ballroom's warmth and noise cut off like a severed lifeline. In the narrow hallway, dimly lit and lined with metal racks and folded linens, Evelyn pressed her back against the wall. Her legs trembled under her, threatening to give out. The tray in her hands tilted dangerously, and she set it down on a nearby counter before the glasses could fall. Silence wrapped around her, the kind of silence that felt heavy, suffocating, alive. She reached into the inside pocket of her blazer and pulled out the envelope. Her miracle, her fragile hope, her 10 years of quiet prayers finally answered. The pregnancy confirmation she had planned to reveal tonight, under glittering chandeliers and with a champagne toast in hand. The paper trembled violently between her fingers. She stared at the printed lines, the medical codes, the faint outline of a beginning, something that was supposed to be shared with joy, with him. But now, staring at the truth of his betrayal, at the future he was already constructing with someone else, she felt the meaning of the paper twist painfully inside her chest. Her child would not be the celebration she imagined. Her marriage was already gone. Her hands rose to her mouth, muffling the soft sound that escaped her, a sound too small to be called a sob, but too broken to be silence. Tears pressed against her eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to let them fall here, in a cold corridor where the walls smelled of detergent and metal. She thought of confronting him. She imagined stepping back into the ballroom, ripping the envelope open, demanding answers. But even in her shock, she understood something with chilling clarity. Daniel had already made his choice. He wasn't hesitating. He wasn't conflicted. He wasn't torn between two lives. He had already left her in every way that mattered. So Evelyn closed her eyes, folded the envelope slowly, and slid it back into her jacket. She chose silence. For now. Evelyn stayed in the service corridor until her breath evened out, the sting behind her eyes slowly fading. But the muffled hum of voices from the ballroom kept pulling her back. She wasn't ready to confront Daniel, not emotionally, not logically, but she needed to understand. She needed to know why he had drifted so far, why he was willing to throw away a decade of their lives, why he was risking everything with a woman nearly 12 years younger than him. So she straightened her uniform, wiped her palms against the fabric, and slipped quietly back toward the doorway, stopping just inside the threshold where the shadows of the hallway blended into the warm light of the ballroom. Hidden, unnoticed, she listened. A small cluster of Daniel's colleagues stood near the bar, speaking with the loose confidence of people who believed everyone around them was either a friend or too unimportant to matter. Evelyn recognized several faces: art directors, account managers, senior strategists. They were laughing and clinking glasses as they talked about Daniel and Ava with the kind of unfiltered ease that made her stomach twist. "Well, he's officially in," one man said, swirling his whiskey. "Landing the Kensingtons is the biggest move he's ever pulled, and dating the daughter certainly doesn't hurt." The group laughed. A woman replied, "Ava's dad practically owns half the Gold Coast. If Daniel plays this right, Markham & Co. could become the top boutique media firm in the city, maybe even bigger." "Exactly," another added. "Harrison Kensington isn't just real estate. He has connections everywhere: media, politics, philanthropy. And Victoria? Her modeling agency feeds half the national campaigns. If Daniel becomes family, the doors just open by default." Someone whistled. Talk about the ultimate shortcut. Evelyn's pulse slowed, not out of calm, but out of dawning comprehension. She had known Daniel was ambitious. She had known he dreamed of growing his agency beyond its modest success. But she had always assumed the ambition came from hard work, talent, determination. She had believed he wanted to build something with her at his side. But now, as she listened, that image shattered quietly. This wasn't about love. This wasn't about connection. Daniel was positioning himself. Another colleague chimed in, lowering his voice slightly. "Look, let's be honest. Ava Kensington isn't just some pretty girl he fell for. She's a ticket into the Kensington dynasty. Real power, real money, real influence. Being with her changes his entire status." "Her parents adore him," the first man said. "They think he's a rising star. Victoria's basically hand-feeding him contacts from her agency. They introduced him to half the donors at their last charity gala." "And her father," another added, "is ready to sign off on a joint media project, but only after the divorce. They're not going to tie their name to a married man with a messy personal life, especially one whose wife doesn't fit their circle." The remark landed like a punch. Her mind repeated the words mechanically. Doesn't fit their circle. Evelyn had never cared about circles, about wealth, about the kind of social power that moved quietly through Chicago's elite. She had built her life with Daniel on love, on effort, on shared survival through 10 years of fertility treatments. But to him, now, it was all irrelevant. She was irrelevant. A shortcut to high society. That was what he wanted. That was where he was going. And Ava Kensington, with her elegance, her youth, her billionaire father, and her mother who controlled a modeling empire, was his gateway. The realization washed over Evelyn slowly, painfully, settling not as shock, but as clarity. A clarity that burned. Daniel's distance, his coldness, his late nights, his sudden obsession with image, prestige, expansion. Everything now made sense. He wasn't drifting by accident. He was climbing deliberately, calculating each step. And she no longer fit anywhere in the future he envisioned. Her heartbreak did not explode. It deepened, quiet, heavy, unforgiving. She pressed a hand to her stomach, the faintest protective instinct rising within her. The child growing inside her had no place in the world Daniel was constructing, and that truth, more than anything she had heard, settled like a weight she could not shake. Daniel hadn't chosen Ava. He had chosen the Kensington Empire, and Evelyn, still standing in the shadows, finally understood just how thoroughly she had been left behind. The apartment was quiet when Evelyn stepped inside, still wearing the catering uniform beneath her winter coat. The city lights of downtown Chicago flickered through the windows, casting long, fractured shadows across the hardwood floor. She stood there for a moment, listening to the silence, a silence that felt heavier than anything she had carried home before. Daniel had texted earlier that he'd be late. Of course he would be. He was probably still at the Palmer House Hilton, basking in the glow of the Kensington's approval, polishing the image he cared about more than his marriage. Evelyn removed the coat and hung it neatly on the rack, moving with the detached precision of someone whose emotions had been temporarily numbed by shock. But beneath the stillness, something simmered. Not rage, not panic, but something quieter and sharper. Resolve. She crossed the living room and entered Daniel's office. He rarely let her in here anymore. The space had once felt like a shared dream, a place where they planned the early days of the agency, nights filled with brainstorming sessions and cheap takeout on the floor. Now it felt sterile, curated, designed for visitors he wished to impress, and designed to hide things. Evelyn switched on the desk lamp. A soft amber glow illuminated neatly stacked folders, a locked drawer, and Daniel's laptop positioned perfectly at the center. She stood still for a moment, remembering the conversation she had overheard earlier, hearing those words again. Divorce. Free soon. The Kensington Project. If Daniel truly intended to leave her, then she deserved to know what he was leaving her for and what he had already done behind her back. She sat at the desk and began with the unlocked folders. The first few seemed normal. Client invoices, project schedules, marketing timelines. But then, in a folder marked Vendor Contracts. Pending. She found something that made her pause. A contract for a payment Daniel had approved to a consulting firm she'd never heard of. One listed at a P.O. box in Cicero, with no website, no phone number, nothing verifiable. The payment was large, suspiciously large for the services described: brand reputation recovery and narrative redirection. She frowned. She opened another folder, then another. Patterns began to appear. Payments routed through shell companies, clients whose accounts appeared tied to scandals she remembered seeing in the news, invoices for strategic silence, reputation shielding, controlled media bypass. She pulled out her phone and Googled the clients' names. 2 were associated with SEC investigations. One was linked to a public embezzlement case in Schaumburg. Another had quietly settled a harassment suit last year, and yet Daniel's agency had continued to receive money from them. A cold realization crept through her. Markham & Co. wasn't just doing PR, it was laundering reputations, covering fraud, selling silence. She felt her heartbeat quicken, but her hands remained steady as she continued sorting through the documents. Hidden beneath a stack of sanitized reports, she found a thin envelope containing handwritten notes in Daniel's slanted script. These weren't meeting notes, they were instructions. Instructions for creating fake testimonials, burying negative search results, and generating fabricated social metrics to boost client status online. This wasn't ambition, this was corruption, and Daniel had built his entire rising star image on it. Evelyn leaned back in the chair, breath slow, controlled. 10 years of marriage flickered through her mind. Every late night he blamed on demanding clients. Every networking event he insisted she skip because it's boring, trust me. Every mood shift he attributed to pressure. Pressure wasn't the cause. Secrets were. She reached for the locked drawer. Daniel kept a small box of spare office keys in the lower cabinet. Within seconds, she found the one she needed. The key slid into the lock with a quiet click. Inside were more financial records, private accounts, unexplained transfers, and a leather folio containing details about the upcoming partnership with Harrison Kensington. Pages of projections, notes about leveraging the Kensington name, and memos describing how the alliance would solidify the agency's place among elite Chicago circles. Evelyn's chest tightened. Daniel wasn't just trying to impress Ava. He was trying to transform himself, no matter what he had to hide, falsify, or destroy in the process. She pulled out her phone and quietly photographed every document, each page, each spreadsheet, each handwritten note. She didn't know yet what she would do with this, but she knew what the Kensingtons would do if they ever saw it. Cut ties instantly. They were powerful, but their reputation was surgically managed. They would never risk being connected to a man whose entire career was built on unethical deals. The thought didn't bring her joy. It didn't soothe the ache in her chest. But it gave her something she hadn't felt since the ballroom: control. She gathered the copies into a neat digital folder, naming it something plain, something harmless. Then she closed the drawer, turned off the lamp, and stood in the dim room, her silhouette reflected faintly in the window. Daniel's world was built on illusions, but she had the truth now, and she held it quietly, steadily, like a blade she wasn't yet ready to use, but one he would never see coming. 2 days passed before Evelyn made her first move. She spent those hours replaying the documents she had photographed, listening again to every whispered revelation from the ballroom, feeling the cold weight of clarity settle deeper into her chest. She did not move rashly. She did not confront Daniel. She did not tell a soul. Instead, she watched him leave the apartment early Monday morning with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. He kissed her forehead lightly before walking out, an automatic gesture so empty it barely skimmed her skin. The moment the door closed, Evelyn went to her bedroom closet. The disguise she needed wasn't dramatic, just someone else. Someone Daniel wouldn't recognize if word ever traveled back. She tied her hair into a sleek low bun, applied minimal makeup, and chose a fitted black blazer paired with tailored pants. Professional, neutral, forgettable. Before leaving, she slipped her real ID into a drawer and replaced it with the alias she had once used for freelance consulting, Elena Roman, a harmless pseudonym left over from an old project. Today, it had a new purpose. The Kensington Model Agency occupied a glass-paneled building on the near north side. The lobby was airy and modern, filled with curated photographs of international campaigns, high-end fashion, luxury fragrance lines, editorial spreads that had shaped careers. Evelyn paused briefly at the entrance, steadying her breath. She wasn't nervous. She was calculated. A receptionist greeted her. "Welcome to Kensington Model Agency. Do you have an appointment?" "Yes," Evelyn replied smoothly. "Elena Roman. I'm here to discuss potential collaboration opportunities with Mrs. Kensington." The receptionist searched the system, found nothing, and apologized. "I don't see you scheduled, but Mrs. Kensington is between meetings. If you'd like to wait." Evelyn smiled. "Of course." Minutes later, Victoria Kensington swept into the lobby, elegant, commanding, the kind of woman who radiated authority without raising her voice. Her silver hair was pulled back in a chic twist, her sharp eyes scanning the room with practiced precision. "Mrs. Kensington," the receptionist began, "this is Ms. Roman. She requested a moment to discuss potential partnership opportunities." Victoria extended a polite hand. "I can spare a few minutes." They walked toward a quiet seating area lined with modern art. Evelyn sat opposite her, legs crossed, posture poised. She played the part with effortless subtlety. "So, Ms. Roman," Victoria began, "what kind of collaboration are you proposing?" Evelyn gave a soft, measured smile. "I consult for small production teams seeking to expand into influencer-focused campaigns. Several of my clients admire the Kensington brand for its reputation and integrity." Victoria's eyes warmed slightly. Flattery used sparingly always worked. "And?" she prompted. Evelyn lowered her gaze thoughtfully, as if weighing what she should say. "Before we approach anything formal, I always believe in due diligence, especially in Chicago's advertising scene." She paused. "Not every agency operates with the same ethical backbone as yours." Victoria tilted her head, intrigued. "Is that so?" "There are firms," Evelyn continued, voice steady, "that specialize in unconventional methods, off-the-book deals, reputation concealment, rapid image manipulation that crosses ethical lines." Victoria's posture sharpened. She did not interrupt, which was exactly what Evelyn wanted. "I'm sure you know how much can hide behind polished branding," Evelyn added gently. "One specific agency has been raising red flags among several of my contacts. I won't name names, gossip isn't my business, but I'd advise caution with any new partnerships in that arena. Chicago's elite can suffer when aligned with the wrong people." Victoria was silent for a moment, studying Evelyn with a strategist's gaze. "You're being deliberately vague." "I am," Evelyn admitted, "because I don't want to overstep. Only, I've seen talented organizations damaged by connections they trusted too quickly." A subtle shift crossed Victoria's expression, barely visible, but unmistakable. Suspicion had entered the room. Evelyn had accomplished what she came for. "That's all I wanted to offer," Evelyn said, rising. "Just perspective." Victoria stood as well. "Ms. Roman, if you learn anything more specific, my door is open." Evelyn gave a polite smile. "Of course, and thank you for your time." She exited the Kensington building as quietly as she had arrived. The cold Chicago wind swept across her face, but she barely felt it. She walked with an even, controlled pace. No triumph, no fear, only focus. Behind her, the first seed of doubt had been planted, a small, quiet ripple in the Kensington world, and Daniel Markham had no idea it had begun. Harrison Kensington did not grant meetings easily. His schedule was guarded like a federal archive, curated months in advance by layers of staff trained to keep distractions away from one of Chicago's most influential power brokers. But when Evelyn, under the name Elena Roman, requested a private discussion regarding urgent concerns tied to his family's future business alliances, the response came back within an hour. A meeting was arranged for the next morning. The Kensington patriarch insisted on choosing the location himself, a private conference suite on the top floor of the Kensington real estate headquarters, a place where he controlled the environment, the security, and the narrative. Evelyn arrived early, her hair tucked neatly behind her ears, her expression composed. She carried only a slim leather folder, Daniel's documents, the same ones she had photographed meticulously days before, evidence she never imagined she would gather, evidence she now carried as calmly as a chess piece being moved into position. The receptionist escorted her to a glass-walled room overlooking the Chicago River. Harrison Kensington entered minutes later, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, authoritative without speaking a word. He closed the door behind him, gesturing for Evelyn to remain seated. "I was told you have information requiring my immediate attention," he said, his voice low and measured. Evelyn met his gaze without flinching. "I do, and I will be direct. What I'm about to show you concerns your daughter, your business interests, and a man named Daniel Markham." Harrison's expression barely shifted, but his eyes narrowed, attentive now, listening. Evelyn opened the folder and slid several documents across the table: transaction logs, fake invoices, shell company payments, notes about reputation laundering. Projections Daniel had drafted for their future joint venture. Harrison examined the documents slowly, page by page, his jaw tightening with each line. When he reached the financial transfers and handwritten notations, he stopped reading entirely. He pressed a button under the desk. Within seconds, an assistant entered. Harrison handed him the documents without explanation. "Confirm every detail," he ordered. "Pull cross-references. Cross-check against our internal investigations database. Quietly." The assistant nodded, gathered the pages, and left the room. Harrison turned back to Evelyn. "How did you obtain this?" "Legally," she replied. "I had access to his office. Nothing was hacked, nothing stolen, simply discovered." "You're very careful," he noted. "I have to be." Silence settled between them until the assistant returned 30 minutes later, a compressed but nervous look on his face. "Everything checks out," he said. "All of it." Harrison dismissed him again and leaned back slowly, hands folding on the table. "So," he said quietly, "Daniel Markham has been deceiving my daughter and attempting to ride my family's name to legitimacy." Evelyn didn't answer. She didn't need to. Harrison exhaled sharply, the kind of sigh that came not from surprise but from insult. "I suspected something was off," he admitted. "Victoria told me about a woman who came to her agency to plant doubts. I assume that was you." Evelyn nodded. "A necessary first step." "You understand what bringing this here means," he said. "This is not gossip. This is criminal exposure, laundering, falsified accounts, fraudulent partnerships. If this reaches the wrong regulators before we prepare, it could blow into a very public disaster." "I understand," Evelyn replied, "and I'm not here for publicity." Harrison studied her again, more intently this time. "Then what are you here for?" Evelyn took a slow breath. She had rehearsed these words in her mind, but delivering them aloud still felt like stepping into a new version of herself. "I want two things," she said. "First, Daniel must face the legal consequences of what he's done, not just for cheating, for defrauding people, manipulating companies, and using your family as a stepping stone." "And the second?" Harrison asked. "My unborn child," Evelyn said softly. "I don't want your money. I don't want your influence. But I want financial security for my child, so they are never vulnerable to the fallout of Daniel's choices." A quiet shift crossed Harrison's expression. Not sympathy, but recognition. Respect. "What is your child to Daniel Markham?" he asked. "His," Evelyn answered. 4 weeks. Something in the room recalibrated. Harrison sat forward, elbows on the table. "You have my attention," he said, "and my cooperation." Evelyn held his gaze. "Then we have an understanding." Harrison nodded once, a gesture as binding as a signature. "The downfall begins now," he said. "Control the timing, control the truth, control the damage, and I will ensure your child is protected." For the first time in days, Evelyn allowed herself a slow, steady breath. The alliance had been formed, and Daniel Markham's world had just begun to crack. The storm didn't arrive gradually. It hit Daniel's agency like a silent detonation. 3 days after Evelyn's meeting with Harrison Kensington, Daniel walked into Markham & Co. expecting a normal morning. Coffee, staff updates, the familiar chatter of account managers preparing pitches. Instead, he stepped into an office thick with attention so sharp it felt physical. Two suited agents from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division were waiting in the lobby. Another pair from the Illinois Department of Revenue stood by the conference room, badges visible, expressions unreadable. His employees hovered anxiously near their desks, whispering in tight clusters, eyes darting toward him. "Mr. Markham," one agent said, stepping forward, "we're here regarding several discrepancies in your reported income, client accounts, and vendor contracts. We'll need full access to your financial records." Daniel froze. My records?" he stammered. There must be some mistake. But the agents were already producing documentation, audit warrants, summons for financial disclosure, requests for immediate access to bank account histories. No mistakes, not today. They escorted him into his own conference room, now occupied by auditors and forensic accountants. His laptop was taken. His financial files were collected. His company server was mirrored by investigators. Within an hour, a bank representative arrived with an announcement delivered in a practiced, icy tone. "Your operating accounts have been frozen pending investigation." Daniel's jaw slackened. "Frozen? You can't freeze my accounts. My staff needs payroll, my vendors, my clients." "Sir, the freeze is legally mandated." He felt the world tilt. Outside the glass walls of the conference room, his employees watched, some whispering, others avoiding eye contact. Panic rippled silently through the office. By noon, news had spread through Chicago's advertising circles like wildfire. Whispers, rumors, speculation. Markham and Coburn is under investigation. IRS agents were on site. They found something big. Clients should get out before they're dragged into a scandal. And clients did just that. By the end of the day, 7 major accounts had sent termination notices. More emails arrived overnight, concerns about the reputational implications of staying with his firm. Daniel woke up to an inbox full of dissolving partnerships, panicked questions from his staff, and a message from his landlord reminding him that corporate leases cannot remain unpaid. Still, he had no idea how this had started. No clue that the catalyst had been planted quietly by someone who had once trusted him with every piece of her life. He tried to call Ava. She didn't answer. When he texted, the dots appeared, then vanished. Minutes later, she finally responded, "My parents want me to take some distance for now. There's too much happening around you. They're telling me to wait until they sort things out." Distance. That one word cleaved through Daniel harder than the audits. Ava's parents, the Kensingtons. Were they behind this? Had they discovered something? Were they testing him? Rejecting him? He tried calling again, but the call went straight to voicemail. He drove to the Kensington estate, hoping to find Ava, hoping for some reassurance, some clarity. Security refused to let him in. The guard lifted a hand, firm but polite. "Mr. Kensington isn't taking unscheduled visitors." "Please," Daniel insisted. "I need to talk to Ava. There's been a misunderstanding. I'm dealing with an audit." "I'm aware," the guard interrupted, "and Mr. Kensington said to direct you to your attorney." Daniel's stomach dropped. Harrison Kensington knew. He knew. And if Harrison knew, then Ava knew. Victoria knew. The entire Kensington circle knew, which meant his future, his partnership, his social elevation, his meticulously constructed image was collapsing faster than he could grasp it. He drove back to the office in a panic, but when he arrived, half the staff had already left. His senior financial manager quit with a single email. His PR coordinator resigned on the spot. Someone had posted anonymously on a business forum about the federal presence at Markham and Cupworth's. Within the hour, it trended. By late afternoon, Daniel's desperation reached a fevered pitch. He stood alone in his dim office, staring at the closed blinds, phone in hand, breathing like a man drowning. His agency, his symbol of ambition, was sinking in real time. He answered call after call from lawyers, accountants, vendors demanding payment, panicked employees asking if they still had jobs. He could give them no answers. Not one. By the time the city lights flickered on across Chicago, Daniel sat at his desk in a cold sweat, mind spiraling, hands shaking. Every pathway ahead narrowed into darkness. Every call from a client ended in severed partnership. Every legal voicemail sounded like a death sentence. He didn't know who had orchestrated the storm. He didn't yet realize the tempest had begun the night he betrayed the wrong woman, and that the quiet force dismantling his world was standing calmly on the outside, watching everything fall exactly as it needed to. The summons arrived on a cold Wednesday morning, delivered not by mail but by 2 federal agents at Daniel's apartment door. Evelyn watched from the hallway mirror as he opened it, confusion twisting into panic the moment they introduced themselves. "Mr. Markham," the lead agent said, "you are required to appear for questioning regarding ongoing investigations into financial misconduct, falsified business records, and tax irregularities associated with Markham & Co." Daniel's face drained of color. This must be a misunderstanding. I've done nothing wrong." "We'll give you an opportunity to clarify everything," the agent replied calmly. "Please come with us." Evelyn stood perfectly still, expression unreadable. She didn't speak. She didn't intervene. She simply observed as Daniel threw on a coat and followed the agents out of the apartment, like a man walking into his own shadow. Hours passed. She made tea. She sat at the kitchen table. She kept her breathing slow, steady, controlled. By the time Daniel finally returned that evening, he looked as though he had aged a decade. His hands shook as he removed his coat. He didn't even look at her at first, just paced the living room in wild, jagged lines. "Someone set me up," he whispered finally. "Someone close. Someone who knows everything about the company." Evelyn lifted her eyes from her tea, but remained silent. Daniel sank onto the couch, fingers buried in his hair. "They had documents, Evelyn. Not things you can just guess. Not things you can fake. They had transaction logs, shell accounts, vendor agreements. They knew exactly what the IRS already suspected. They even asked me about payments I never told anyone about." His voice cracked. "Someone betrayed me." He looked at her then, really looked, but there was no suspicion in his gaze, just fear, exhaustion, desperation, and the growing realization that the world he had built from smoke and mirrors was collapsing around him. The next morning, agents returned. This time, they didn't ask him to come voluntarily. "Daniel Markham," the lead agent said, "you are under arrest for charges of federal tax fraud, wire fraud, falsification of business records, and conspiracy to conceal income from regulatory agencies." The words hit the apartment like thunder. Evelyn stood by the doorway, her hands clasped quietly in front of her. Daniel looked at her as if hoping she would intervene, defend him, tell the agents there had been some mistake. She did none of that. His wrists were cuffed. He was escorted out under fluorescent hallway lights that suddenly felt far too bright. As soon as the door closed, Evelyn exhaled. Not relief, not triumph, but something deeper, heavier. An ending she had never asked for, but now accepted. That afternoon, her phone buzzed. A text from Harrison Kensington. "Charges confirmed. Formal indictment expected. He will likely serve several years. We will ensure your child's future remains protected." Evelyn read the message once, then set the phone down. Later that evening, she received a call from a Cook County family law attorney, one Harrison had arranged discreetly. "Mrs. Markham," the attorney said, "we have prepared the divorce petition. Given the circumstances, the court will likely expedite the proceedings. Your grounds are clear: irreconcilable differences, adultery, and financial endangerment." Evelyn listened quietly, nodding even though the attorney could not see her. When the call ended, she sat alone in the dim living room, feeling the weight of everything settle across her shoulders. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't heartbroken. She was simply exhausted, but resolute. She reviewed the draft documents, the division of property, the petition for full legal custody of her unborn child, the restraining orders associated with Daniel's criminal charges. Every page deepened her clarity. This was no longer about revenge. It was no longer about exposing the truth. It was about survival, her child's future, her own safety, a clean break from a man she had loved for far too long. That night, she placed the signed divorce papers in a sealed envelope and left it by the front door for the attorney's courier. She didn't cry. She didn't falter. When she finally turned off the lights and walked toward the bedroom, the apartment felt strangely quiet. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of a chapter closing. And Evelyn Markham walked into the darkness, not as a woman destroyed, but as a woman who had chosen to save herself. The River North apartment was small, sunlit, and profoundly quiet. Everything Evelyn needed after the storm she had survived. Harrison Kensington ensured the purchase went through discreetly, with paperwork filed through a trust that protected both her privacy and her unborn child's security. The space wasn't extravagant, but it was hers, safe, untouched by Daniel's past or the ambitions that had once poisoned their life. Evelyn settled into the new routine gradually. She spent her mornings walking along the riverfront, hand resting over her growing belly, breathing in the cold Chicago air. For the first time in months, she could think without fear, move without watching her shadow, sleep without the echo of Daniel's deceit. Then, unexpectedly, someone from her past re-entered her life, Dr. Lucas Everett. He had been her fertility specialist for years, a quiet anchor during the darkest phases of her infertility journey. He had seen every heartbreak, every failed attempt, every moment she had fought to stay hopeful. He had also been the first person to confirm her miracle, 4 weeks pregnant, before everything with Daniel unraveled. Lucas reached out after hearing of her relocation through a mutual colleague. His message had been simple: if you ever need support during the pregnancy, I'm here. No expectations, just care. Evelyn hesitated at first. Trust felt like a fragile thing, but she eventually agreed to meet him for coffee near the medical district. When she walked into the cafe, Lucas stood to greet her. He looked the same, warm eyes, gentle demeanor, an ease that made the world feel less sharp. "You look stronger," Lucas said softly. "I'm trying," she answered. They talked for an hour, then 2. Lucas never asked about Daniel, never asked for details she wasn't ready to share. Instead, he asked how she was sleeping, what she was eating, whether she was feeling supported. He spoke to her as someone who genuinely cared, not because of obligation, not because of opportunity, but because he had once seen her at her most vulnerable and had admired the strength she never recognized in herself. He became a steady part of her life after that. He drove her to prenatal appointments when the winter roads were icy. He helped her assemble a crib in the apartment, laughing quietly whenever the instructions made no sense. He left fresh fruit by her door on mornings she felt nauseous. He sat with her in silence on evenings when fear gripped her unexpectedly. There were no declarations, no rush, no intrusion, just presence, a slow, gentle rebuilding. As her due date approached, Evelyn found herself leaning on Lucas more than she expected, but never in a way that overwhelmed her. He was patient, steady, a grounding force when memories of Daniel resurfaced during the nights. When her labor began, she called him without thinking. Lucas arrived at the hospital within minutes, remaining by her side through every contraction, every tremor of fear, every exhausted breath. He held her hand as the medical team moved with calm urgency. "You're safe," he whispered. "I'm here. You're not alone." When baby Nicholas finally entered the world, a small, perfect boy with Evelyn's quiet eyes. Lucas was the first to place a gentle hand on the newborn's back, steadying him as Evelyn began to cry softly with relief. It wasn't the life she expected, but it was the life she needed. As weeks passed, Lucas continued visiting, always with the same respectful warmth. He helped with bottle prep, changed diapers with surprising skill, and sat beside Evelyn during long nights when Nicholas wouldn't sleep. Their connection deepened, not through dramatic confessions, but through consistent acts of care. In the background, Daniel Marcus